Nope. Nah. Nuh-uh. Oh, hello there. Sorry, you all caught me at a bit of an awkward time. I'm in the midst of planning some renovations. I'll be with you all in a moment. Ooh, I really like this one. Wait, what's that small text? Caution. Side effect of spell may include unintentional summoning of a bad video game. Review of said game will be required to counteract summoning. Well, that sounds horribly plot convenient. I reviewed Shrek Treasure Hunt and Eminem's Kart Racing. I can handle reviewing a bad game. Alright, here it goes. My me sweet summer will I not know you me slow. Hey, I like the looks of this. It seems I got lucky too. No signs of a bad game anywhere.
Oh no!
Well, I guess this is what I'm doing now. It may be hard to believe at points, given the incredible state the franchise is currently in, but Crash Bandicoot's track record really wasn't the greatest before his insane return. I am not apologizing for that pun. The original PS1 trilogy and CTR are absolute classics, but once Naughty Dog was no longer at the helm, Crash games became a total gamble when it came to quality. Sometimes we got something good, sometimes we got something mediocre, and sometimes we got something bad. And unfortunately, mediocre and bad tended to be more common than good with this series, so it's kind of a miracle that it was able to rebound as well as it did with the Insane trilogy, Nitro Fueled, and from the looks of it, the upcoming Crash Bandicoot 4. But this game I've got here today, Crash Boom Bang, is a bit of a special case. It's not just your ordinary bad Crash game, no. It's considered by many Crash fans to be the worst game in the entire series, and in my opinion, this game here was the catalyst to Crash's temporary downfall. Granted, it wasn't the last Crash game before Insane, but given the direction Titans and Mind Over Mutant went after it in comparison, I like to think this played a large part in the series' eventual hiatus, and to think this game was the celebratory title for Crash's 10th anniversary. I got this game for Christmas in 2006, the same year that the game came out, and the same Christmas that I got my Nintendo DS. Yep, this was one of my first ever DS games. What a great start. I actually played this game quite a bit growing up, but I think it was more so due to me having an unhealthy loyalty to Crash as a series, because even back in the day, I really didn't like this game. Though it's been a very long while since I last played this. So, in honor of Crash's first brand new game in 12 years coming out soon, I've decided to go ahead and rip this band-aid off and finally review this low point of one of my childhood icons. I get the feeling I might need emotional support after this. So upon starting a new file, you're immediately greeted with, of all things, a character select screen. 4 characters available from the start, and 4 you have to unlock. And you better choose your character wisely, because your choice is permanently bound to your save file, with the only way of swapping characters being to delete your file and start from scratch. I kinda get what they were trying to go for, as you also name your profile after picking your character, and are able to buy costumes to personalize them, but for a game like this, it's a very strange choice. Imagine you were starting up a new file in Mario Kart Wii, and you immediately had to pick a character, and that was the only character you ever got to race as. That's basically what the situation is here. It's made even more questionable with the presence of those unlockable characters, meaning you'll have to make a second save file if you want to play as any of them. Not helped by the fact that there's only a maximum of 2 save files in the game, and the things you unlock don't carry over if you delete both save files. Yes, they relock. We're only on the character select screen, and I'm already questioning my decision to replay this game. Though while on the topic of the character select screen, the choice of playable characters here is kinda confusing. Your starting lineup is Crash, Coco, Purah, and Pinstripe. Odd choice. And the unlockable characters are Crunch, Cortex, Fake Crash, and Tana. I'm not entirely sure if this was the call of the devs or the publisher, but I would have expected characters like Engine or Tiny to show up on the roster before Pinstripe or Tana. Also, Purah wears pants and walks on 2 legs now. I feel very uncomfortable. The game's story focuses on this millionaire fellow known as the Viscount, searching for an all-powerful, wish-granting artifact called, and I quote, the Super Big Power Crystal. Wonder how long it took the writers to come up with that name. So the artifact that Viscount's looking for, what should we call it? Well, it's a power crystal, but it's super big and can grant wishes.
That's perfect! The Super Big Power Crystal!
Wait, what? Having had no luck in finding the Super Big Power Crystal himself, Viscount decides to gather up the smartest minds to do the work for him in the form of an amazing race-style competition. So he sends out invitations, one of which going to Coco and Crash. The Viscount's gathering the smartest minds to help him solve puzzles and uncover a lost artifact, and he picked Crash. Excuse me, my good sir, what is wrong with you? And that's really the whole plot of the game. The Viscount has various characters from the Crash series solve puzzles and uncover clues to the location of the super big power crystal. The only other major plot point that happens is Cortex trying to take the Viscount's map at one point so he can find the crystal for himself. But even then, Cortex's conflict with Viscount is immediately dropped after that cutscene. The rest of the game, he's back to following Viscount's demands with the others. Speaking of cutscenes, while the comic panel style does work pretty well for what it needs to do, I'm really bugged by how the text boxes are handled in these. There's absolutely no indication of who's talking at whichever point. So you get situations like this, where Viscount barks out orders, and the next line of text is supposed to be Coco getting suspicious of him. Or at least, I think that's what it's supposed to be. Or later on in the game, Viscount's telling a story of how his grandfather tried to find the crystal years ago, but his ship struck an iceberg and sunk. Someone among the group notes that that sounds like a movie, because that's definitely something reasonable to say to someone talking about their family member's death. But most of the cast is on screen at that point, so I have absolutely no idea who said that. Yes, I know Crash games have far from the most fleshed out plot lines, but even with that in mind, the story is just kind of meh. It doesn't help that Viscount is probably the most unremarkable antagonist in the entire series. So much so that he didn't even make a cameo in CTR Nitro Fueled. And that's the game with characters as obscure as Yaya Panda and Megamix in its roster. But that's enough about plot stuff, let's get to the meat and potatoes of the game. To put it as straight as possible, Crash Boom Bang is bad Mario Party. Correction, it's Bad Mario Party that predates literal Bad Mario Party. You move across the game board via dice rolls, you play minigames after turns are over, you compete to have the most of some kind of item, it's just straight up Mario Party. And unlike CTR, which follow Mario Kart's formula but still provide its own spin on the gameplay to make it its own standout experience, Crash Boom Bang doesn't really go for that approach. It does do a few things differently, yes, but none of them work to the game's benefit, whether that's in its identity or its gameplay. In fact, in regard to the former, this game as a whole doesn't really have much identity. As a Mario Party style game, it has nothing stand out to offer aside from it being on the DS, which even then, Mario Party went ahead and did that a few years later, and way better. But especially as a Crash game, there is very little of the franchise's identity in this game. Beyond the playable characters, the only other Crash-like elements present are a small handful of items from the series, the presence of the Atmosphere in a few minigames, and that's pretty much it. You could very easily swap out the Crash cast with other characters and basically nothing would change. Now this isn't to say that immediately makes the game bad, but it certainly doesn't help its case. What actually makes this game bad is, well, the gameplay. To explain this, I'll start by going over the basic structure of a turn. At the start of each turn, you're first told by Aku Aku about who's currently in first place. You're then told which turn number you're on, as well as some sort of other remark or tip, followed by Aku Aku telling you how to use items, which is also when you're able to use an item. This repetitive sounding process happens on every single turn. After everyone's played their items for that turn, everyone rolls their dice and move at the same time, which initially sounds like it actually speed up the pace of board gameplay, but beyond the first and last board, it really doesn't, and I'll go into why shortly. Once everyone's moved, the effect of whatever space they've landed on will come into play, and from there, the cycle repeats. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Minigames are not always guaranteed. Someone needs to land on a minigame space for a minigame to occur at the end of the turn. There are two types of minigame spaces. One of them is a 4-player minigame space. You land here, everyone partakes. But the other type of minigame space honestly confuses me. The implication is that whoever lands on this kind of space gets to choose who they challenge. But every time I've landed on this type of space, I've never gotten the chance to choose. Also, sometimes there's just 2 characters in a challenge, but sometimes there's 3, so I don't get it! Also, if you're not chosen for a challenge, which doesn't happen often with these AI, you get to either bet on who you think will win the minigame, or you go to the item shop. This is the only way to access the item shop in the entire game, so unless you're able to land on item spaces, this is your only way of getting items. And as I'll go over in just a moment, there's a particular reason why that's such a problem. Also, you can only access the shop if you have the sale flyer item, so there's even less of an opportunity to go to the shop. Now, not every board has the exact same objective. There's actually 2 different objective types. Half of the boards require you to just get to the end first, but the other half require you to find key items hidden across the board. Now, this first type of objective honestly isn't too bad for the most part. The volcano board is the one exception, as there's just far too many board events that can easily destroy your progress. It took over half an hour to complete this board because of that. But it's the key item search boards that are especially irritating to finish, and that's entirely due to the nature of items in this game. So each of these boards has 4 key items, and all 4 of them need to be found for the match to end. You get them on very specific blank spaces, but there's zero indication on which blank spaces they are. So you either have to guess and hope that the dice roll RNG allows you to try all of them, or you could use the magnifying glass item, which will reveal the locations of every key item on your map for a single turn. You have 1 in your item box at the start of story mode, but items don't reset as you progress through the story. You use that magnifying glass, it's gone. You either have to get a new one from an item space or buy a new one from the shop. And the odds of either of those happening are not in your favor at all. And reminder, there's 3 of these kinds of boards, and each board has subsections as well, which key items can be in. So finding these is an incredibly tedious process. And that's before you take tile flipping into account. Yeah, another mechanic in this game is that every space has an underside that can only be exposed by flipping it over with an item, such as the spatula. And before you ask, yes, key items can be hidden in blank spaces that start off on the underside, meaning you'll have to flip over that space before you can get the key item. And like the magnifying glass, you'll only start with a single spatula in your item box, and when you use it, it's gone. So that just adds another layer to the tedium. And if your luck's horrible and you're unable to get these items from an item space or get a chance to go to the shop, you're gonna have to rely on the AI to get the work done for you. And these AI are, to be perfectly blunt, stupid. Point is, these boards tend to take incredibly long to beat. And yeah, Mario Party boards aren't exactly short either, but they also tend to be, well, fun, which is a luxury this game doesn't have. Now, of course, the board game stuff is just half the game. So how's about we talk about those mini games, eh? So because these are mini games in a DS game released in 2006, this of course means that almost every mini game relies entirely on the touchscreen. Now that's not inherently a bad thing. Mario 64 DS's mini games were all touchscreen based, and a lot of them were really fun. But as I mentioned earlier, fun's not part of this game's recipe. So this of course means that it has to implement the touchscreen controls poorly. And to clarify, this here isn't an issue because I'm playing on an emulator. Having played the game on actual hardware as well, I can confirm that the touchscreen controls are horrible in both cases. The stylus recognition is really weak, making many of these games borderline unplayable, and the ones that do function properly are either boring, frustrating, or both. And the minigames that don't use the touchscreen are minigames that use the microphone. And by use the microphone, I mean blow into it until your lungs stop working. See, this is why I'm ever so grateful that I used emulation for footage recording, because the DS emulator lets you map microphone use to a button. Not ideal in all cases, yes, but in this game's case, absolutely. But yeah, the minigame lineup in this game is incredibly weak. In fact, I can only think of a single minigame that I had even just a bit of fun with, and that was this pizza making minigame. But even then, I couldn't enjoy that one as much as I wanted to because of another feature in the game that I'll go into in a bit. But before we do that, I want to go into some of the more technical stuff. First and foremost, how about that anime art style, eh? To give quick context, this game was developed by a Japanese studio known as Dimps, making this the first and only Crash game to be developed in Japan. And because of that, the game uses the Japanese designs of all these characters. Now, I'm not going to say these designs are necessarily bad, just that they look bad in this game. A lot of these character models just look really off, with special mention going to Cortex and his weird looking mouth. And that's just the playable characters. Aku Aku looks royally ticked off at all times, and the characters that appear exclusively in the Silhouette Guessing game have definitely seen better days. The areas don't provide much visually either. They're all pretty generic looking environments. Again, very little of that Crash vibe can be felt in these locations. Same goes with the music. It's an incredibly forgettable soundtrack that doesn't even sound like it belongs in a Crash game. Now, I imagine at this point, some of you may not think this game is outright terrible. Bad, yes, but nothing beyond a crappy Mario Party clone. Well, that's not all this game has to offer within its gameplay, and these next few features are what make this game so awful to me. We'll go over these from least bad to most bad, to make things interesting. So first off, this game is horribly impatient. If you take too long with literally anything, the game will start counting you down. Whether that's reading through text boxes, rolling the dice, choosing which direction to go on the board, figuring out which item to use at the start of your turn, heck, even reading through the minigame instructions puts you on a timer if you take too long. And by too long, I mean literally just 5 seconds. Here, take a look for yourself. Now, I kinda get why you'd want something like this for when playing multiplayer. You know, make sure no one's stalling for whatever reason. But in single player, it really makes no sense. It's just you and the AI. What's the need to rush like this? Secondly, on the topic of multiplayer, you're able to create custom animated messages, or motion panels, as the game calls it, to send to other players mid-game. Now, on paper, this seems like a neat feature, and it probably is in the context of multiplayer. However, in single player, the AI are able to use motion panels, and they will use their motion panels. A whole lot. Now, motion panels will always appear on whichever screen the action's taking place on. So during the board game portion, they'll appear on the top screen, and during minigames, they'll appear on the bottom screen. Now, with that said, they're just a minor irritation when they show up during the board game part, but during the minigames, They interfere with stylus recognition. So if there's somewhere you need to tap on the screen and there's a motion panel on the way, too bad, you gotta wait. And all three AI love to spam their motion panels, sometimes all at the exact same time. These motion panels often make even the normally functional minigames borderline unplayable. It's utterly ridiculous. And somehow this isn't even the worst part of the game. And that's what we're finally going to go over now. The worst part of this game, by far, is that it's impossible to lose. That probably doesn't make any sense whatsoever, so allow me to explain. So in Crash Boom Bang, your main resource is Wumpa Points. Your main goal on each board is to have the most by the time it all ends, and you gain them from spaces, from winning minigames, and from completing tasks within the board's objective. However, points are also your currency in this game, so when going into the shop, you'll be using points to buy items. And you don't need to worry about not having enough, by the way. Your points will go into the negatives if you spend more than what you have. Now, of course, in any other game, you'll logically want to avoid going into the negatives in points, as it no doubt put you at a horrible disadvantage. But in this game, it doesn't matter. You could be in any place in the standings when a match comes to an end in story mode. The game will continue onward to the next cutscene and the next board. No different cutscenes depending on your placing, not even with the ending, no in-game consequences for being in the negatives. No matter what, the game will keep going. So with that in mind, what's the game's purpose? It tells you that you need to collect points so you can win, but there's absolutely no consequences for not doing so. So where's the incentive in trying? Where's the reason to try to win in the minigames, or complete the board objectives first? Easy answer, there is none. And because of that, it constantly feels like the game does not care about the player playing the game. You didn't come in first? Well, that sucks. Let's just move on anyway. And this all is made infinitely worse thanks to a little experiment I decided to try. So during my footage recording sessions for this game, between the whole you can't lose and the previously mentioned timer, I started to wonder, is it possible to beat the story mode without ever actually pressing a button? Could you start up story mode and let the game play itself the whole way through? So instead of just wondering this, I decided to test it. I started a new playthrough of the story mode, and went through the first two boards, and for the entirety of them, I never put through a single input except where 100% mandatory. Those moments being skipping through the story cutscenes, getting through the betting screen as the timer doesn't show up here of all places, and leaving the end of board results screen to go into the next cutscene. Beyond those, I never touched a button or tapped the screen. And if you don't believe me, I actually uploaded the entire raw footage of my test. I've put a link to it in the description. You can see it all play out for yourself. And what were the results of my experiment, you may ask? Well, here's the short answer. Yes, it is entirely possible for the game to go through an entire board without you putting through a single input. In fact, not only was the game able to complete the first two boards without me doing anything, but I actually managed to come in first place on the second board. Luigi wins minigames by doing absolutely nothing? Child's play. Cortex wins entire matches by doing absolutely nothing. And above all else, this is my biggest problem with Crash Boom Bang. Sure, there's a lot of other factors going against it. The gameplay feels uninspired and with little to do with the series it's supposed to be based on, the controls are incredibly unresponsive, and several features and mechanics constantly interfere and make the game that much more tedious to slog through. But above all that, the game itself just does not care. It's basically on autopilot, regardless of how well the player's doing at it, or if the player's even playing at all. And because of that, while I wouldn't say it's the absolute worst game I've ever played, I can confidently say it's up there as one of the worst. Because while games like Shrek Treasure Hunt and Eminem's Kart Racing may be objectively worse, you still have to at least try in those games. Though on that note, I can now say that I've gotten the worst that the Crash series has to offer off my plate, which means I can only look up from here. And hey, just in time for Crash 4 too. So with that said, this has been Black Mage Maverick, and until the next video, have a nice day everybody.